This lesson is going to introduce the rules of construction. These are the rules we use when perhaps one course in a description is in disagreement with another, or even parts of a single course are in disagreement within themselves. And then what do we do in these situations? So I'm just going to hit some high points throughout this slideshow. You should definitely go back and read each slide individually to get all of the details. So starting off, sometimes statements in a description conflict with other statements. The starting point is to try to discern the intent of the description as a whole. So we want to look at all the calls and all of the courses working together. Well, how do we get what the intent of the description is? Very rarely are you going to see wording in a description that literally says something like, the intent of this description is to blah, 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 blah. And so a possible example of looking for intent could be as follows. You have a course in a description that calls to the center line of a creek. Then it provides several courses with directions and distance only, but it does not specifically call along the center line of the creek. When you measure the creek and then you compare it in CAD to the description plot, you find that the courses and the physical center lines somewhat match. Maybe they cross back and forth of each other in the same general path. If you hold the courses at their actual directions and distances that were provided in the description, this creates some pieces of the parcel now lying on the other side of the creek and not easily accessible without an easement across the adjoiner's parcel or some other kind of remedy. So in this situation, we may determine with this extrinsic evidence that we measured of the center line of the creek that the intent of the description was actually for the center line of the creek to be the boundary and not for us to specifically hold those directions and distances. So that's a pretty good example of having to look at what the intent may actually be and looking at the whole situation together as one. So a description is considered a written form of intention. There's a set of rules that can be applied called the rules of construction. They're also known as the order of importance. And these are pretty important. Like, we'll talk about these in multiple classes. You'll hear about these when you go to seminars and do continuing education. Like, this list of items is probably something you'll work with the most as a boundary surveyor in your career. So there are other lists of rules or orders that pertain to other things in surveying. For example, there's a list of order of importance for ownership. There's a list for roadways, like elements within a roadway. Several of those other types of lists will be covered in other classes. In this class, we'll focus on the priority of calls or the rules of construction for written intention, basically descriptions. So looking at these and to provide a little bit of example, number one is a call for a survey. And typically that means it was the survey that created the boundary, or it could be the description is updated for a retraced boundary. And so maybe the old description was so out of whack that a new description was written. A new parcel wasn't created, but just a new description was written from a survey that had been completed. So a call for a survey is first because it means the lines were actually measured and marked on the ground. There's many instances of descriptions being created just on paper without a survey being completed. So a call for a survey is going to have the highest priority. The next item, number two, is a call for monuments. Monuments can be legal, which would be something like a section line or another parcel boundary described in a certain document. Or monuments can be physical, like a wood post or a creek center line. Physical monuments can then be further classified as natural, which means they're just naturally occurring in nature, or they can be artificial, which means they're created by man. Natural monuments hold higher weight because they are less likely to be mistaken for something else, and they're typically going to endure for a very long time. The next is number 3, a call for maps or plats of record. The measurements within these were specifically made for this, they weren't specifically made for this exact description, but the elements were measured and a map created from them, so they're reliable evidence of support for the line that they're called in. Number 4 is calls for adjoiners, which in a way this means that it's calling for any item that's referenced in that adjoiner description. So maybe the description calls for wood posts, rebars, center of a road, whatever it might be. Those items can be helpful, but not as directly or quickly as helpful as the items listed above that. So if all of these are missing or failing you, the next thing to look at would be adjoiners. Now, they actually have to be called for in your description. You can't just necessarily go looking for adjoiners. This would be like extrinsic evidence that could be helpful if it's not called for. All right, number 5, distances on boundary. So an example of this would be a call like 432 feet along the center line of the road. So a boundary is provided, the center line of the road, but the distance is what we have to hold. We're going to only go 432 feet. The next item is number 6. It's bearings on boundary or angles between lines. So if none of the prior items in the list were called for or can be found, if a reference of direction can be determined from some other line, then bearings or angles between those lines and the one you're looking at can be used. Number 5 and 6 are interchangeable, as it makes sense with the calls in the description or the physical evidence on the ground. So just because in this case 5 is above 6, it doesn't necessarily mean it's more important. It's really in the situation which one of these makes better sense. Number 7 is a call for area, or I shouldn't say a call for area. It's just areas that are listed as additional supportive information. So this is applied when a description gives information for every line, and then at the end it says something like containing 43 acres more or less. If all of the foregoing information is not available, so items higher in the priority of list, or if they're not agreeing with each other, if you happen to apply an adjustment to a line or a few lines that can create the listed acreage, then this rule can be applied. This rule is not applied when all the description provides is something like the north 10 acres of lot 12. In that case, the boundary of lot 12 and an area of 10 acres will control above everything else. So this is only in the instances where areas listed kind of at the end, a parenthetical, hey, this should be about, 43 acres or whatever. Number 7 can also be interchangeable with 5 and 6 in the same situation, whatever makes sense and whatever works. The last one is coordinates. These are last because coordinates are the result of calculations, and calculations are the result of measurements. And with the advent of GPS measurements and the various datums that can be used, there is kind of any number of ways that coordinates can be generated, and they are not tied to any specific thing. It is an arbitrary number representing a location on the ground without really referencing any other physical or legal item that can help back it into place. So, last case scenario, coordinates can be used. So, I want to highlight some stuff about monuments here. This goes through the details and descriptions of monuments. One of the things that you'll have to do when you find monuments is decide whether you're going to accept them or approve them for use. And so a monument can be accepted when it has 3 items: background, character, and recognition. So basically, it needs to be described or called for in a record. It has to actually look like the thing called for or matches its description. And then recognition means it needs to conform to the positions in relation to other items in the description or in the map or whatever. So an example's been provided here. We have a description that says east 100 feet to a 5/8 inch rebar with a cap inscribed ABC. So for one example, top example here, we've gone out and done a survey of this description. We found the monument. It, has background. It was called for. It has character. It matches how it was described. And it's also recognized, even though the direction is not perfectly east or 100.00 feet, this is pretty close. So I would feel comfortable accepting this monument. Now, another example is shown here at the bottom. We find the monument that was called for. It matches the description, but it isn't matching into recognition. South 45 degrees east is what we end up measuring out in the field from the nearby objects, and the distance is almost 48 feet longer than what was called for. So this is going to throw up red flags. I'm not saying I wouldn't use it, but I need to do some extra research and investigation to figure out what might be going on here. I might look for an older description to see if the course was correct in it. Maybe it got copied over incorrectly the next time it was written. I might look at the surrounding parcel descriptions to see if their courses along this area match what I found physically. And so again, maybe this one was written incorrectly. Maybe the monument just got moved or one of the objects around it got moved. We don't really know. So this is, when it doesn't meet all 3 of the requirements, this is a red flag to say, hold up, we need to look into some more things. So this slide provides an example of how a call for a map can provide helpful information. Without calls to monuments, we have to rely on directions and distances that might not conform well with the physical evidence. So the point of this slide really is to show what the value of using monuments in your descriptions are. We have an example without monuments here. So we have north 34 degrees east, 200 feet, then south 40 degrees east, 300 feet. That's all it says. We don't have monuments. We don't have a call to a map or anything like that. Let's say, for example, there really legit aren't any monuments out there. But if we included a call to a map that had created these parcels, that could help us out. So this example of a description says, as referenced in map A in the county recorder's office, thence north 34 degrees east, 200 feet, then south 40 degrees east, 300 feet. So the distances and directions are still the same as what we had in the description without a reference to a map. But a map typically implies the measurements were made. And so if we find on the map that one of the distances varies from what the description says, then the map distance is going to control. I wanted to point out this slide as well. There are 3 kinds of calls in a description. They can be interchangeable. It might include some courses that are flat calls. Some of the courses in the description might be locative. Some might be locative and descriptive. It just depends, but I want to highlight that there are these 3 different types of calls and describe the difference between them. So flat calls is considered a mathematical line because all we have is a direction and a distance. We don't have any monuments or calls to a map or legal monuments or anything like that. And so, as long as things are kind of making sense with the whole situation and the whole scenario, we will hold the flat calls, whatever the distance and direction is, those will control equally. Now, locative calls will provide a direction and distance, and then also, a call to a monument or something like that. So, for example, direction and distance to a 4x4 post. So, this 4x4 post is going to locate the corner. Another type of call is a descriptive call. And they can be helpful if the locative portion of the call has been destroyed. So the example here is to an iron rod in the road. So a descriptive call kind of gives us an idea of where the corner might be. It helps point to it, helps guide us to it. If the iron rod is gone, then a location for the corner to be reestablished in the road would be acceptable. So this kind of narrows down where the corner could be located. Descriptive calls can be inherent. So if the call is along a river, then obviously we're going to follow the meanderings of the river. It's not super specific, but the river is there. We can see it. We know we got to follow it wherever it goes. Or descriptive calls can be applied. And if it's applied, then it's much more specific. So it means whatever the descriptive item is, that's going to control the line. So if the descriptive call here was the southeast side of Jones Building, very specifically, the alignment of the line is going to match that of Jones Building. So those were the main highlights I wanted to do. The remaining slides in the slideshow are various examples of how these rules of construction can be applied. Read through those, look at the examples, make sure you understand, and then as you plot descriptions further in this course, think about these and how, if you're actually going to go out in the field and try to find some of this stuff or put it in, how would you start to do the priority of calls? What's going to hold over something else?